Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning, Glory America, Bonjour, Hi, Canada. On this final radio hour of the week, I am joined on the Hillsdale Dialogue today by Dean Matt Spalding. He is the Dean of the Hillsdale Graduate School in Statesmanship at the Kirby Center in Washington, D.C. But Dean Spalding has been recalled to the Hillsdale campus, probably because it's erupted in anti-Israel protests, and probably because all the dorms have been occupied and things are burning. What are the bonfire situation like at Hillsdale, Matt Spalding?
I haven't found any yet. I've been looking desperately, but nothing is going on out here. As a matter of fact, I have to say I'm on the main campus, among other things, getting ready for a very important graduation in May with a very important student to receive a degree here.
Matt, first of all, did you see the Babylon Bee? Did you see the Babylon Bee?
I did. That was great.
Put it up if you can, Arlie. The people watching on the Salem News Channel, they, of course, picked Hillsdale and said, boy, all the outrages, like I did, broke it up. Nothing is going on at Hillsdale that is out of sorts. They're going to have a commencement. Can you believe USC canceled their commencement, Matt?
I can believe it, unfortunately, in the situation we find. The things that are going on, I mean, there's an array of things going on here, but I mean, one thing to keep in mind is behind all this is a complete abject failure of the modern universities to proceed to uphold their teaching mission. This is no longer about education. Things like graduation, our teaching classes, is all secondary to what is going on in the main show.
Now, how did you like Speaker Johnson telling the Columbia students, go back to class? I thought it was perfect.
No, I thought he was spot on in terms of reminding them why they're there in the first place. This is the fact that the leadership of Columbia, to address this problem, and then now several other universities followed suit, immediately went to hybrid classes and suggested teachers don't come to the campus. That wasn't for security purposes as much. It was to get around their real job. The problem here is that the administration, the professors, and the students are all broadly in cahoots as to what is going on here. This is not a crisis in the way we are observing it. This is the nihilistic chaos of the modern university.
I was in the green room last night at Fox because I was doing special report, and Mark Thiessen and I were talking about what's going on campus, and I said it's the lethal combination of ignorance and ideology. And Mark added, and supreme confidence in their own point of view. And that is we see a lot of ignorance, we see a lot of ideology, and we see a lot of misplaced confidence, Matt Spalding. What do we do about administrators? Because every college president not named Larry Arnn or Ben Sass, or Daniele Strupa, who I happen to think does a fine job at Chapman, I can count on one hand the number of college presidents. President Strickland at Ohio State is taking good action, who have led.
Richard Corcoran at New College in Florida.
Yeah. What do we do about these bureaucrats who have been promoted in the Peter Principle above their abilities?
The first point you made about the ignorance of it, I don't know if you saw, but there was footage of interviews with some of these protesting students who weren't actually sure why they were there. And couldn't explain what was going on, but they were there. So I think part of it we need to understand is there's when I talked earlier about there's kind of a broad agreement as to what's going on here. There's something going on for the students. There's something going on with the administrators. But the first thing to understand is that the moral decline, the collapse of the universities has been going on for decades now, and it's filtered up through such that now the administrators are following the faculty, which is intellectually deadened. The administrators are incapable of running the institutions. And now, lo and behold, the students, the product of that faculty and of those administrators, is turning out to be radicalized. The faculty has no intellectual ammunition to respond to them. They don't know what to say because they really ultimately agree with them. And the administrators are incapable of shutting it down because they, too, are, in a way, a product of the same problem.
You know,
That's
Dean Spalding,
this all goes together.
I often say that bad news for the country is good news for media because we got something to talk about. I happen to now believe bad news for elite institutions is good news for one elite institution, Hillsdale, because I think parents want their kids to be educated. I think you're going to be overwhelmed with applicants because you also have the network benefits, as we've seen the Hillsdale Mafia take over Washington, D.C., the network benefits of Hillsdale. I don't know if it's happened on Wall Street the way it's happened in D.C. Has it? Is Hillsdale taking over Wall Street, too?
It's just a matter of time, Hugh. But you're absolutely right in the sense that, our numbers are all overwhelmingly up and lots of interest. And I'll tell you, the one thing that's been going on for some time, we see it subtly here and there, and we're seeing some benefit from it, or at least we're seeing the effect of it, is that especially Jewish students, Jewish groups are desperately looking for alternatives. They cannot safely send their students to these colleges anymore, and they're looking to alternatives. And lo and behold, one alternative is a small Christian college in Michigan. They want to have a real education, but they also want to go somewhere where religious views are respected to this, among the students. Indeed, that's a central aspect of their cultural life on campus. So the tectonic plates, I think, are shifting. And if we add this to all the additional things going on with higher education, I think this just unmasks it and shows the deep crisis that higher education is in under the current circumstance.
Now, Dean Spalding, I wonder if you're willing to play Jeopardy with Hugh Hewitt with me. Because Jeopardy with Hugh Hewitt, I have three new questions for people who have opinions about the Israeli conflict in Gaza. The first question is, give me just a brief taste of what you know about the Ottoman Empire.
Probably you're doing this here.
I am.
The problem in the Middle East is that it was overwhelmingly controlled by large empires, and I think that a lot of the problems today is because Israel is the anti-colonial state that has existed and come out of that alive.
Exactly right.
Is that right?
The Ottoman Empire controlled it all. It lost World War I, and the only state that emerged successfully from that collapse is Israel. Now, second question, Matt.
I was not prepped, just for the record. I was not prepped. This was completely off the cuff. I didn't know you were going to do this. But this is what's so ironic about this situation. The reason why this whole conflict has been absorbed into the left. At first, I think the left wasn't sure what to do because after the attack on Israel on October 7th. Were the Israelis, were they victims? Thus, or were they to be absorbed into the liberal kind of hierarchy? No. They were colonizers because they were too kind of Western European adjacent. But of course, the history is exactly the opposite. The existence of Israel after the British Mandate.
Oh, that was my second question, doggone it. You jumped. I was going to say, tell us what the British Mandate is, because I'll bet you, Dean Spalding, not 1 in 100 of the protesters know what the British Mandate is.
Oh, absolutely not. But the Balfour Declaration of remind me
1914,
1914, right after World War I, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. What do we do with the space, but also these Jews? And the Balfour Declaration created a mandate on behalf of the British government that we would oversee and see to the creation of this state. Israel eventually breaks free from it, and I'm anticipating your next question. The first country to ever recognize Israel as an independent country was the United States when Harry Truman immediately recognized the state of Israel.
Oh, you're right about that, but you're wrong about my third question, because nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Spalding.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
What was the Roman Empire doing in 70 A.D., Matt Spalding?
They were ruling the world.
Beyond that, in the area of Judea.
Well, they were expanding the Roman Empire into Judea, and they were starting to have problems with their ability to rule it because they were increasingly unruly people in that part of the empire.
They destroyed the Jewish temple, and the second temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70. You're getting 2.5 points, Matt Spalding. You knew they were there, but you didn't. The key is the indigenous people of the area are Jews. So anyone who's wanting to honor the native peoples on whose land buildings have been built, you better start with the Jews in Israel, because they got it going. I'm coming back with Matt Spalding. We got a lot to talk about today. Not only the campuses, but we got to talk about that Supreme Court decision yesterday.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, Dean Matt Spalding of the Graduate School of Statesmanship at Hillsdale, which is headquartered at the Kirby Center, is my guest this hour. Dr. Arnn away this week. Dean Spalding, we're going to spend the rest of this hour talking about yesterday's Supreme Court argument. I have listened to the 2 hours and 40-minute oral argument. I was fascinated by it because it was like constitutional bingo. We had Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch v. Maryland. We had Korematsu, we had Youngstown, Sheeton. We had everything you could ever imagine. It was truly an epic argument. What did you make of yesterday?
I could just see you like a little child getting excited. The little child lawyer in you with all this stuff. I agree. It was all over the place. It was fascinating. My bottom line, I think it's looking very good. Not necessarily in the direct sense, but in the indirect sense, to be a double victory for the Trump, for Trump. And the argument about immunity strikes me as there's a divide, but it's not going to fall with Jack Smith to say he's the president can be prosecuted for anything. I mean, good God, you could, and actually Brett Kavanaugh would seem to be very animated on this question. You can't prosecute for official actions, or otherwise the president can prosecute his predecessor for, say, suspending habeas corpus. That's absurd. But there's some probably limit to that even, so they might send that back. But that, of course, delays it past the elections, which means that's a huge victory for Trump. Correct?
That is the immediate and I think almost inevitable consequence from listening to that. And it's upset. Let me play for you Jamie Raskin last night. And I mean, I lost all respect for the congressman. I'm glad he won his battle with cancer. But when he went on Joy Reid last night and said this, all respect goes out the door. Cut number 2.
Well, there are politicians who are not even subject to popular election, unlike me. They should move the Supreme Court over to the RNC headquarters.
Matt Spalding, that is such an irresponsible statement. What do you think of that?
Oh, of course it is, but it tells me two things. One is they think they're going to lose. That's the immediate thing.
Oh, good point. I hadn't thought of that. You're right. They're despairing.
More broadly, they're softening the ground for that outcome. But more generally, I think it just once again underscores the fact that serious, deliberative, thoughtful constitutional thinking is now outside of the, or it's considered to be outside of mainstream liberalism, and the modern Democratic Party sees that as a partisan activity, and that just shows you the absurdity of things and where it's developed and where we've gotten to in these larger debates. I mean, I thought that in the midst of all the debates over Trump and cases in politics, that discussion was thoughtful, reasoned, careful, and I was actually fortified by that. It's the exact opposite of narrow partisanship or party politics.
I'm going to play a couple of cuts. I'm going to play a couple of cuts after the break. But what I particularly liked about the argument yesterday, on an aesthetic basis, both of the advocates were superb, Mr. Sauer and Mr. Dreeben. They both had very awkward voices. Sounded to me like Sauer either has an unusual voice or had laryngitis, and Mr. Dreeben, like me, has got a lot of miles on his tires. But they were smart, and it was engaging, Matt. It was exciting.
No, that's right. And I was actually the parts I've listened to and what I've seen is I was actually very much somewhat relieved by that. I think it started out a little slow, but really got going, and they both did an excellent job.
When we come back, I'm going to play for you a couple of key excerpts here. But generally speaking, I just want to make sure we nail this down. We have 1 minute to the break. You and I think, agree. It is almost certainly going to lay out guidelines for what is immunized by the president, what isn't. They're going to remand it if they don't even set it over for re-argument because it's so complicated.
Correct.
It's going to go back to the district court. It's going to be appealed, whatever the ruling is, and that's going to come back to the Supreme Court. That's my prediction. Do you share it?
I completely share it, which means this does not affect the election.
And it might go beyond that. It might end, and we'll talk about this after the break. The Alvin Bragg Cirque du Soleil edition in Manhattan that's underway.
Absolutely.
I'll be right back with Dean Matt Spalding. He knows of which he speaks, though he is not one of the brethren of the law. He's very smart about the Constitution. They do not have to go together. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. It's the last radio hour of the week. I'm live inside the Beltway. Dean Matt Spalding, who helms the Graduate School on Statesmanship at the Kirby Center in Washington, D.C., is my guest. He's at Hillsdale today, which is why we don't have a camera on him. But Dean, Spalding and I have been talking about yesterday's Supreme Court argument. Dean, I want to play for you two excerpts that I consider to be the most crucial. And there were a lot of great exchanges. I thought the Chief did a good job. I'm almost certain he'll assign himself the opinion in this because it will be a Youngstown sheet and tube opinion for the ages. But everyone did a good job. I wasn't particularly impressed with Brown-Jackson, but I thought Kagan did a good job and Sotomayor did a good job arguing for limiting immunity. But these are the two key takeaways. First, let me play for you Amy Coney Barrett, who waited until 2 hours and 20 minutes into the argument to spring this on Mr. Dreeben, cut number 5.
Let me ask you about state prosecutions, because if the president has some kind of immunity that's implicit in Article 2, then that immunity would protect him from state prosecutions.
Of course. Full stop. Matt Spalding, she waited, she put the knife in at the end. Because, of course, the backdrop to this is Alvin Bragg, Fannie Willis, and now Arizona. What did you think of that question?
I thought it was explosive, but it was perfectly logical, and it follows directly from the whole case. I've just been teaching the Constitutional Convention and the Federalist Papers in my course, and I'm reminded by how much the structure of the constitutional system is what protects the rule of law and our liberties. And put in the broadest context, right, we always talk about the horizontal checks and balances, but there are also kind of vertical checks and balances. And the way the court system and the Supremacy Clause orient all that into the courts means that there are all these additional responsibilities, not only between the three branches within the federal government and the roles of the executive versus Congress and the courts, but also that implies things about the relationship of the federal government to the state governments. Things the state can't do, things the federal government can't do. So, yes, it follows exactly, perfectly logically, that if the president has some immunity under Article 2, broadly in line with a general structural notion of the Supremacy Clause, right? The Constitution and the laws made under, thereof, and the person who executes those laws should not be subject to prosecution by states.
Mr. Dreeben had to concede the Supremacy Clause would, of course, control. Second one, I don't have the tape of this, but Justice Barrett's the junior justice, so she waited to the end. The senior justice is Justice Thomas. And I don't have the tape, but he began by saying, so, Mr. Sauer, where is this immunity of which you speak? I'm paraphrasing here. In his deep, profundo bass. I loved it because it's a hard question, right? There's no immunity anywhere. Where do you find this? And what'd you make of the answer, and how would you have answered it, Matt?
As I recall, I think that was actually his very beginning, as one of his
first question.
It started off. I mean, how talk about being thrown back on your feet. That is a hard question, because this gets to one of those things that's kind of in the nature of the law. It's like, what exactly is the judicial power? What is the executive power? I would argue that there is an immunity inherent in the executive, but it's in the Constitution itself, and it's especially in and clearest in and absolute in the things that the president does as their official acts in the Constitution. It's the equivalent of, which most people know, right? You can't arrest a congressman when they're on their way to Congress, when they're actually going to do their job and to legislate, right? There are things inherent in their roles. The office itself is where I would find that immunity. They're not immune necessarily in all cases as individuals. That's where it gets blurry and gray, but it really draws out of the fact that they are an executive. They're a constitutional office of the Constitution. That's where I would.
Yeah, Dean, I would be willing to bet a lot of money that somewhere in the opinions that come down, most likely in the Chiefs, there will be a quotation from McCullough versus Maryland. We must remember that this is a Constitution we are expounding.
Yes, absolutely.
What is that intended to convey?
Well, as I like to always point out, the term of art is jurisprudence, which is to say that we are dealing with a Constitution. We are constructing it in how we think. And my argument is that courts construct it in their decisions, congressmen in passing legislation, executives in doing their job. But we always remember it is a framework of law, but there is still a form of reasoning, a prudential reasoning, and a using of the arguments, making the arguments that should be in line with the framework and principles of the Constitution, but we have to think it through as a practical document which does certain practical things. So it's absurd that the President of the United States has no immunity ever. That's clearly the case. It's also absurd that the president can do whatever they want in every circumstance.
Correct.
We have to think about the structure of the Constitution, and there's a distinction between what they do as president, an official act, which is actually a constitutional action within the Constitution that's their role for which they are elected. So we can parse these things out.
In fact, it was perfectly illustrated by the Chief Justice in his hypothetical. Let's say the president accepts $1 million bribe to appoint someone as an ambassador. It's clearly, or nominate someone as an ambassador. It is clearly an official function to nominate an ambassador. It is also clearly a crime to accept the $1 million. How do we parse that? And then Mr. Dreeben, later in the argument, kind of gives away the game when he says, well, what we're doing here is designing a system, meaning case of first impression, complicated, we need a rule set. And so, Matt Spalding, this is a hard case.
It is, but to go to your point, it's exactly the kind of case you can imagine John Marshall thinking his way through that and following it from first principles on through, and in terms of constructing how we should think about it. So I think it's ripe for a very important ruling here that I would hope, and the discussion sounds like the justices are thinking in those terms. This is actually an important, legitimate ruling of a court dealing with a constitutional question correctly before them of the right nature, such that they can have a structured, clear, excellent decision. So I'm actually looking forward to it, even though I don't know the details of what it'll say.
Youngstown Sheet and Tube. I've always long held most important case. Some people say Brown v. Board, and of course that was for righting the wrong. But in terms of going forward, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, Justice Jackson's concurrence was referenced yesterday by Mr. Dreeben, because and it's not a hard set of rules. It's a series of zones. We're going to get something like that. But let me play for you Justice Alito discussing with Mr. Dreeben Korematsu, and then get your reaction to it. This is cut number 8.
It is correct, Justice Alito, but I think that we should also consider the history of this country. As members of the court have observed, it's baked into the Constitution that any president knows that they are exposed to potential criminal prosecution. My friend says after impeachment and conviction, we don't read the impeachment judgment clause that way, but it's common ground that all former presidents have known that they could be indicted and convicted. And Watergate cemented that understanding. The Watergate smoking gun tape involved President Nixon and H.R. Haldeman talking about and then deciding to use the CIA to give a bogus story to the FBI to shut down a criminal investigation.
I mean, Mr. Sauer and others have identified events in the past where presidents have engaged in conduct that might have been charged as a federal crime, and you say, well, no, that's not really true. This is page 42 of your brief. So what about President Franklin D. Roosevelt's decision to intern Japanese Americans during World War II? Couldn't that have been charged under 18 U.S.?
Okay, I want to pause there. Are you amazed at the quality of this conversation, Dean Spalding?
No. First of all, the number of references there. I'm like just thinking of the ways in which that conversation could go, both historical and legal. But of course, the quality of the conversation then is underscored by the quality of the follow-up question. I mean, it really cuts to the chase. I mean, that Alito question responding, his reference to Nixon, and then his responding with a reference to FDR in both of these high-profile case instances was excellent, and unusual. And again, we're dealing with these are core constitutional questions having to do precisely with what the court should be focusing its time on, which are the actual operations of other officers of the Constitution in their core responsibility. So I think it's a great example of an on-point debate on a key question.
I'm pretty sure, I don't teach again until January, and I teach Con Law 1 and 2. I'm pretty sure I'm going to oblige early in the course, maybe the second week, that they listen to the 2.5-hour argument, just to understand the facility with which good advocates move, not just through law and decisions, but through history. Matt, that goes on where Alito argues with Dreeben about what Attorney General Biddle advised him. I mean, you've got to know stuff to have opinions on this.
No, which is why, I mean, back to your early reference about Marshall's, remember it's a Constitution we're dealing with here, is, too often, you said I'm not of the brethren of the law, but as I like to say, I'm learned in the law.
Yes.
But too often the popular opinion of many people is, the Constitution is a document for lawyers. It's a technical document, and the law is a technical exercise. Well, law can actually many times be very technical and complicated. But at its best, that constitutionalism, which was at the heart of what the founders had in mind, the Madisonian project, was this political understanding of the Constitution, by which I don't mean partisan and narrow, but I mean in the noble sense. It's a framework of clauses backed by a lot of history that allow us to be free and self-govern ourselves and thinking through that is the key to America.
And my caution to pundits out there, if you don't know who Biddle is or Korematsu was or any of this other stuff, don't have an opinion on this case. Be smart. Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. As Dean Spalding is being polite, I don't have to be polite. Don't be a fool. I'm going to come back. One more segment with Dean Spalding on Hillsdale Dialogues. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All the dialogue at hughforhillsdale.com.
Hey there. Today I want to tell you about the Hillsdale K-12 Classical Education Podcast. This unique show explains how children benefit from an American classical education. Whether you're a teacher, student, or parent, you'll find something of value on the show. You'll hear from teachers and administrators from schools around the country, as well as Hillsdale professors and friends who are leading the effort to revive the American tradition of K-12 education. When you listen, you'll learn all about classical education, what it is, how to teach it, and why it matters today. And there are dozens of back episodes on specific topics, like teaching Singapore math, reading great books, and even understanding how athletics is critical to a child's development. Listen every Monday on podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Dean Spalding, by the way, this weekend, are you there for convocation or commencement, or are you there on other business?
I'm here in business right now, but I'll be back in a few weeks for the main graduation ceremonies, which I alluded to earlier, and that important graduate who is the most important graduate this year is my daughter.
Oh,
graduating in May.
Oh, congratulations! So your commencement will not be interrupted by a mob of students chanting about things about which
correct.
They know nothing. Now, tell me a little bit about commencement speeches. I don't know who the speaker is at Hillsdale this year. What do you think they should aim to do? Because I don't like the ones that say pursue your passion. I'm with Professor Galloway on this. Don't pursue your passion, pursue your talent.
No, that's right. I mean, look, it's a commencement. The word commence, the idea is you're commencing into your lives. I mean, so much of commencement speeches today are based on current politics or current emotional, subjective views of the culture around you. This is why these protests and everything is so such an abomination of all that. The purpose of a college, it's this partnership between faculty and students to learn things. And that learning thing has something to do with reading history and studying books and reading arguments and law and philosophy and art, such that you are actually learning to control your passions, to direct the mix of your passions in your mind and your soul towards higher things. And a good commencement address should recognize that fact and give good heart to these students, because that's who we're sending out into the world to be leavened. And so one of the biggest problems I see looking at these college campuses, yes, the students have been radicalized. Yes, the faculty is really behind them intellectually. And yes, the administration can't control what's going on. But we have to recognize the extent to which modern liberalism, that modern liberal project we associate with so much of the modern academy, has given up on their core purpose. It's not about...
So, Dean Spalding, if everyone goes to hillsdale.edu, they can get all the online courses. They can get smart. If they apply to, their student applies to Hillsdale, they can really get smart. But the question is, I don't know what to do about the academy. I suggested yesterday to Grover Norquist that the federal first budget under the second Trump term include the provision that not a dime of federal money goes to any school with a $5 billion endowment or more, because there's no reason to send it to them if they've got not a dime of money. And further, no state gets any federal support unless they have a robust private sector choice option. Those are my two beginning steps. What else do we have to do? And you have to answer this in under a minute.
Well, those are good steps, but I'll put it in broader terms here. This is an aspect of the modern problem of the administrative state. The Congress is essentially delegated to the Department of Education, which in turn is delegated to accreditors. One of the main steps, I think, is they need to pull that back in. Right now, it's very difficult to stop money are to go after colleges that are clearly and blatantly discriminating against their students, not protecting their free speech, and endangering them. That's because Congress no longer controls that, right? It's Title VI under the department,
correct?
Bad administration, and then these accreditors are the ones who determine whether a school is eligible for loans. That whole system needs to be thrown out and corrected. You've got to go after and change the core problem here, which is Congress doesn't control where its own money is going, and a lot of money is going to these colleges, and a lot of these colleges, especially the bigger ones, have massive endowments. They're basically small colleges that don't teach anymore, connected to hedge funds, and that's got to be broken. That, I think,
that is to me the key challenge, and I think if the former president picks that up and wields that sword, he will win. Dean Matt Spalding, have a good visit. I hope you can make it through the crowds of police and protesters, which don't actually exist at Hillsdale. But welcome back to D.C., where it might be happening when you get back. I don't know. I hope it doesn't happen here. But congratulations to your daughter as well. Getting through 4 years of Hillsdale is hard, but boy, is it worth it. Go get your application at hillsdale.edu. And if you're a late-in-life learner, all you have to do is go to hughforhillsdale.com or look up Hillsdale Dialogues on iTunes. Whatever it is, go and get smart. There's no excuse not to be educated. Not when Hillsdale has made it all available to you for free.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.